Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock. Let's go over the market. Let's talk about what happened today on this shorter week to start September off. Bit of a painful way to start September off, but all things considered, really not that bad. Could have been worse. So I'll give you my thoughts moving forward on Tesla stock. I'll go over the broader market as well. I'll give you what I personally believe in. And yeah, let's jump into it. If you enjoy, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. And of course, again, if you enjoy my updates, technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, etc. Well, again, I do have a membership on YouTube, right? That link is down below in the description of every single video. If you're interested, you can join the private membership. And again, you get all my updates, thoughts, posts, technical analysis, options flow, etc. Every single day as the market is open. All it is just $3 USD a month. That's all it is. And you get all my updates on Tesla and the broader market as well. $5 includes that plus NVDA if you're interested in NVIDIA updates. $7 includes all that plus non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA stocks that I share and essentially non-broader market stocks like Apple, things like that. I talked about United Healthcare, for instance, recently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is down below, of course, for $7 a month. If you're interested, it includes all of that. And on the weekend, I do chart requests with members on Discord. But jumping into a Tesla, closing the day down pretty much 1.4%, we'll say, closing at pretty much $329 per share, which compared to the market is going to be, roughly in line, maybe even arguably a little bit of an outperformance, but roughly in line, we'll say, with the market. So what does this mean moving forward for Tesla? Is Tesla ready to bounce? Are we, ready to move higher, or are we still, going to head lower, I guess, essentially is what I'm trying to say. So let's talk about that, right? So what do I see? Well, before we do Tesla, because I always forget, and I want to make sure I don't forget it, let me very quickly talk about QQQ. QQQ, which is, of course, is the tech index, if you will, or mainly focused on tech. Nice bounce off the 50 EMA, right? You can see right down to the 50 exponential moving average, and also arguably a pretty important support sitting at pretty much right around this 560 level. Come on, how many times I have to click this? There we go. So in other words, QQQ, this is kind of roughly the path I see right now. So there's a risk of this kind of head and shoulders pattern right here that I have outlined, right? As long as QQQ remains below about 575, I actually do expect a continued bounce. I actually wouldn't be surprised if we fill this gap tomorrow, the day after, sometime this week, honestly, at around 570-ish. So another $5 up on the Qs here. Really wouldn't shock me if that were to happen. But then I do expect a potential rejection around here. And if we end up losing this sort of about 560, very high 550s level, then I do believe that we start losing key levels. We start losing key exponential moving averages. And I do think we will most likely come back down to essentially retest previous all-time highs right around here, around the high 530s, 540, something like that, right? Is my main target to the downside, which at that point, I believe everyone's going to get very bearish, when in fact, that's just going to be a very healthy retest of previous all-time highs. And I actually think from then on forth into year end, we actually most likely go higher. That's kind of my very quick rundown on what I personally believe will happen on QQQ. But as usual, let's let the levels decide. Again, below about 560 is the concerns being raised. Above 575, and the bulls actually take control much sooner than expected. So watch for those two levels. But jumping to Tesla, the main thing for Tesla here is the fact that we did break down below, we gapped down and we broke down below again, those sort of, the dreaded, we'll say, low 330s. Below 330s, is where we have, once again, a bit of a concern. Now, Tesla's been kind of up and down between these 330s. It kind of had a resistance here, then it broke down, then it went up below, above them, then it kind of turned into support, then it lost it, and then it went back. We're sort of all over, up and down below the 330s, above the 330s. It's been kind of, very, very messy, to be completely honest with you. But the way I look at it is this, right? Again, sometimes you have to look at it from kind of a structural perspective. And, on the daily, as far as I'm concerned, Tesla's making higher highs, higher low, higher high. And as far as I'm concerned, this is just another higher low. Now, the caveat is this, right? There could be a bit more weakness. So I'll give you what I think is going to potentially happen. But to make it as simple as possible, the easiest perspective on Tesla is as long as it pretty much remains below, again, about the low 330s, which is essentially what that 21 exponential moving average is as well, about 333. As long as it remains below about that 333-ish region, which is exactly where we rejected today, I actually think Tesla can make one more low. Now, I don't think it'll be a substantial low. I think it'll be only a small low. For instance, I think it will be pretty much from today's close, actually, give or take. It'll be about maybe another 2, maybe 3%, right? Give or take 2 to 3%. But I would expect it to come down as long as it remains below 333 roughly to these green Fibonacci's right around here. These green Fibonacci's is where everyone usually gets bearish on a bullish retracement, and the vice versa. If we get a kind of like what NVIDIA did over here, where NVIDIA had this massive breakdown and then it rallied up, everyone got bullish up here because the green Fibonacci's are really good at it. But guess where NVIDIA rejected? Right at the green Fibonacci's. Pretty much the exact same thing, just flipped on Tesla stock. And that's kind of what I still have expected. Again, I still believe that this is a bullish retracement, right? I do still, kind of the way this one was. Let's take a look at this one. Remember this one back here? here when Tesla essentially broke and made this fresh high over here above this high here, and then had this retracement down. And, you know, admittedly there was a higher risk, but everyone was getting very, very bearish around here, and everyone was getting even mad at me for still being bullish on Tesla stock when that was obviously the right move. Why? Because it was a bullish structure. We made bullish higher highs, and this, as far as I'm concerned, until proven otherwise, is a bullish higher low, right? Take the Fibonacci, same thing. We reverted back in this case to the red Fibonacci, which is a 618 Fibonacci, which is usually the first major stop. The second one being the green Fibonacci's. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're this time seemingly going towards the green Fibonacci. So just keep that in mind. Essentially below 333 roughly, Tesla still has this, you know, a very real opportunity and possibility to come down to these green fibs at around the very low 320s. That is still a very real possibility. But as long as it ideally holds pretty much above 320, which is essentially those Fibonacci's, I actually do lean bullish. Apple and Google are rocketing. I don't know what. I'm actually happy about that. Maybe some partnership between Apple and Google. I actually added more Apple today, so I'm actually happy about that. I'm not sure what's going on with Apple and Google rocketing. Two of the stocks actually hold, so I'm happy with that. But nonetheless, so I digress. I'm kind of getting distracted by after hours movement here. I'm kind of curious what the news is. But nonetheless, right? So what we have here going for Tesla is just, again, it's just that simple. As long as Tesla ideally holds these Fibonacci's, I still view this as a bullish retracement because, again, I don't... Yes, it's a deep retracement. That's how the green fibs usually work. It's usually a deep retracement that's getting kind of, you know, it gets kind of spooky in the opposite direction. But that's just how these things work. As long as it ideally holds this, but especially doesn't break below essentially 314. If we start losing 314 and we start losing this low right here, because this low right here is the pivot low that we made, oh no, that we use, I should say, to jump off of that range, off of that level where we made this initial higher low from this low here, and we use that pivot to essentially make this fresh higher high. So to me, this becomes a very strong bullish low. In other words, this is the bull's territory. This whole area right here is bullish territory, right? This is a bullish retracement. However, if bulls lose their grip and we lose this low and we drop below this low, and especially start closing daily candles below pretty much 314, that's where like a very large red flag, like red warning signs and sirens and whatever start going off. That's very bad. That would be extremely bearish, actually. So you definitely don't want to see that. But as long as it, at the very least, remains above this, but ideally holds the 320s, which is, again, that green Fibonacci retracement, I still view this as a retracement from a bullish perspective. And that's just, it's really just that simple, right? So let's continue monitoring and let's see how this actually ends up forming, moving into the rest of, the week and whatever. But I really wouldn't be surprised, especially based on how the options flow looks on Tesla, which, yeah, there's some action here, but it's, it's kind of honestly slower-ish. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a slower week. And honestly, between kind of 333 roughly to about this sort of 323 region, we kind of chop. We get some chop around this general vicinity. But again, below 333, I do view this as a pretty decently high probability of occurring. You definitely shouldn't discount this probability of happening by any means whatsoever, in my opinion, not financial advice. If we happen to get an early a bullish move to the upside and we start getting back above 333 roughly, again, the low 330s, and start turning it back into support, then we can make a move higher faster, which will be also pretty damn good. Very quickly, I want to jump on the weekly as well, right? What is the weekly suggesting? Well, the weekly still has a green MACD and the bullish SMI, which is good, but we are obviously back within this pennant, right? And obviously last week we did print a shooting star candle, which is a bearish candle. But unless we close this week red, which, essentially is pretty much below last week's close. So essentially, if we close this week, pretty much, yeah, below 333, actually, believe it or not, that would be bearish. That actually would be a little bit of a concern. So what I would like to see is kind of like what these two candles did right over here, right? You can see how, let me remove this. There's too much noise in the charts. You can see how these two candles right here kind of had a similar look, right? Where we also printed a shooting star candle this week right here. This was about a couple of weeks ago or so. And then we had a, rough start to the week. We ended up, moving down pretty substantially on that start to the week, but we closed the week strong. And that's where we had that bullish breakout of the weekly pennant. Well, kind of the same thing I'm looking for here between these two candles right here. Exact same thing, maybe a weak start to the week, but as long as we get a strong close to the week, essentially above 333, yeah, the bullish thesis on the weekly time frame is still intact. If we start getting a closure below the low 330s on the weekly, and we start closing, below this weekly close from last week, we start closing back within the pennants, we start getting some conflicting signals where the daily can potentially still have the bullish retracement as long as it's above ideally 320, but then the weekly would be below 333, and we start getting conflicting signals, which would not be the ideal scenario, to be completely honest with you. But again, there's still 3 days left in the week. Let's not jump to those conclusions just yet. Let's see how this actually plays out ultimately. But that's kind of how I see it moving forward. So all in all, that's my current perspective on Tesla stock for the weekly candle closures, what I expect to see for the week, what I want to see for the week for, continuation on the bullish thesis, and what the daily needs to make sure it kind of does, if you will, and really doesn't do from a bullish perspective to maintain that bullish retracement as well. So all in all, that's kind of how I see it, but I do still believe Tesla is in a bit of a bullish situation here setting up overall, and I don't see it being bearish just yet until we start losing key levels. Like I said, low 320s to as low as 315 being the major red flag. Whew, that was a lot of talking. Options flow, like I said, a little bit more bearish than bullish flow throughout the entire day overall. But towards the end of the day, some bullish flow did actually come in. So there was more bullish than bearish flow in the last, hour or two of the day, which is a good sign. But still, for Tesla specifically, it was a little bit of a slower day nonetheless. So anyways, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.